Today's video calls for butternut squash. We're going to make a roasted butternut squash soup. And knowing my luck, by the time I post this, it'll be like 95 degrees outside. Not soup season anymore. And that's how the weather works here in Colorado. You wait 5 minutes and it'll change on you. It's pretty much a mess. But enough about me. Let's get into this video. So the first thing we're going to do is preheat our oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit or 205 Celsius. Next, we're going to grab our butternut squash and find the flattest part of the squash, so when we go to cut it, it doesn't roll around on us. Once you find that, you're just going to cut the tip where the butternut squash grows from the vine. Once you do that, you're going to run your knife down the neck of the squash. You don't have to cut all the way through it this time. This will just make the next step easier. Once you fight to get your knife free, you're going to stand your squash straight up and run your knife down the cut we just made. And when you do it this way, make sure your fingers are out of the way when you go to push the knife through the squash. You don't want to miss any digits. Once you split your squash, you're going to grab a spoon and start taking out all the membrane and the seeds. It's the same method as you would do for carving a pumpkin because they are part of the same family. When you cut it, it doesn't have to be uniform. Sometimes you get a perfect cut where it's both sides are even, but if not, it's really not a big deal. So go ahead and clean it out. You can save the seeds and toast them for garnish. We're not going to do that today, but it's always a nice option. And this is what it should look like. Next, on a half sheet tray lined with parchment paper, we're going to boil a full onion that's been cut in half, then cut in quarters, and 6 garlic cloves. And we're going to toss both of those in extra virgin olive oil and a small pinch of salt. The olive oil will help get a nice caramelization when we go to roast our vegetables. So give that a nice toss. Once you feel like everything is well coated, go ahead and throw it on your sheet tray. Then grab your butternut squash and throw that on the sheet tray as well. Then grab your oil again and lightly coat both sides of your butternut squash with some extra virgin olive oil. Then rub it to make sure everything is coated evenly. Once you feel like everything has been coated evenly, we're going to sprinkle a decent amount of salt onto our squash. Then we'll go ahead and pop that into our oven. Then set a timer for 1 hour. Yes, this timer only goes to 55 minutes, so I went another 5 minutes. About halfway through, at the 30 minutes, you're going to check to make sure your onions and garlic aren't burning. And if they're in good shape, go ahead and leave them in. Now that our timer's gone off, we'll pull our butternut squash and let it cool down for a bit before we move on to the next step. If any of your garlic or onion has burned at this time, go ahead and discard that because you don't want that bitter taste to your soup. Now that your squash has had time to cool a bit, we're going to grab a spoon and just start scraping the meat away from the skin. You may get a little bit of skin with your squash at this time, which is not a big deal. We'll go ahead and straighten that out later. You just don't want large chunks in your soup. Scraping it is the easiest and best method I found to get as much of the squash out as possible. You may need to scoop, which isn't a big deal. And you do not want your butternut squash to cool completely. That'll make it even harder to separate the squash away from the skin. You can see a little bit of steam if you look close enough coming off the squash. My little fingies are wrecked, so I'm used to this. Use your best judgment on when you should scrape your squash yourself, or you can test your toughness and go at it fairly soon. You'll use the same method on both sides of your butternut squash. This side just looked better, so that's why I'm only showing you one. But we'll scoop everything and throw it into a pot. So at the ready, you should have a soup pot ready to go. And of course, discard any of the butternut squash skin. We won't need it. Now that we have all of our veggies ready to go, we'll transfer everything over to a large soup pot. You're going to want to use the largest pot you have because this calls for a fair amount of liquid. All of our vegetables have made it to our pot. We're going to add 2 tablespoons of maple syrup. You can also use honey, but maple pairs really well with butternut squash. Then we're going to add just over 4 cups or 1 full liter of vegetable stock. Then bring this entire mixture to a simmer and let it simmer for 20 minutes over medium heat. This will help bring all of our flavors together. Now that our soup has simmered for 20 minutes, we're gonna blend it together. You can use a standard blender or a stick blender like I have. You'll blend it until all of your mixture has come to a nice smooth texture. Whichever method you use, this liquid is hot, so be careful. You don't want to splash any of that stuff on you. Once you have everything nice and blended and smooth, we're going to add 3 tablespoons of butter. This will help add flavor by fatness and give our soup a nice little sheen. You can leave the butter out and keep it vegan if you would like. It's important to add the butter when you're blending it. This will help emulsify it into our soup so you don't have a separation of soup and of fat. So blend it until all of your butter is well incorporated. Once all of your soup has been blended, you're going to grab another pot, a mesh strainer, and a ladle, and start ladling your soup into your mesh strainer. I go with about 3 ladles worth. Then I use the back of my ladle to lightly push through the puree. You don't want to push too hard, because if you push too hard, you're going to push through all the particles that we don't want back into the soup. This helps ensure that we catch any skin that we weren't able to get, or any other rough pieces of vegetable that weren't able to be blended. You always want to make sure you strain any puree, if that's soups or puree sauces. This will ensure that you get a nice ultra smooth puree or an ultra smooth soup. Do this a couple times and then toss out any of the stuff that's caught into your strainer. Then we'll go ahead and do this through the entire pot. Don't worry if it's too thick at this time. We'll go ahead and thin it out in the next step. And this is what your soup should look like after you've strained it. A nice ultra smooth texture. Then we're going to add a splash or about a teaspoon of white distilled vinegar and season to taste with salt. You can also add nutmeg at this time or add more maple if you choose to. And if it's too thick for you, go ahead and add more vegetable stock to thin it out to the consistency that you like. Once we get our soup to where we like it, we're going to ladle it into a bowl. And of course, you got to have bread with your soup. Not having bread with soup is a crime if you ask me. Next, we're going to garnish it with some greens. You can use spinach or arugula. Any type of green will work. And then we're going to add a nice crisp Granny Smith apple, which is a great contrasting flavor. Alright, let's give our soup a try. It's nice and creamy and smooth, and that butter adds a nice fatness to it. Then there's that natural sweetness from the butternut squash and the maple syrup. But then the vinegar balances it all out with that tartness. Let's try it with the greens and the apple. The greens and the apple add a little bit of crunchiness, so you get another flavor profile and some texture to it. And the apple's sweet but tart at the same time. It's really good. Oh wait, I can't forget the best part, the bread. Alright, that's it for this one. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and hopefully this soup helps you get through the cold weather. I know it will for me, even though this week is supposed to be really nice, which is crazy. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and also find me on Instagram at TaylorMakes92. I have a whole loaf of bread and an apple to eat, so I'll see you on the next one. By the time they post this, not they. Alright, let's give our spoon. Nope. Alright, let's give our soup a try. I don't know why I'm using this one. This thing's like a garden shovel. Alright, that's it for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it as much as I did. I didn't enjoy it though.